Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Welcome back to the Better Sex Podcast. This is Jessa, and I am so glad you're here. Welcome back, and if you're joining me for the first time, I'm so pleased. I'm glad you found me. Every week, I put out a show on some topic related to sex, and it just continues to astound me as I am nearing, I think, the 100th episode that I have released. I have many more sort of on deck. It amazes me how diverse these topics are. It's incredible. I mean, I see this even as a sex therapist, how diverse my clientele is, even though they're all coming in around sex. There's a lot going on. And today's episode is no exception. I don't think this would have ever occurred to me. I think I said this to the guest in the show too, actually. I don't think it would have occurred to me to do a show on this topic if I hadn't sort of put out a call to guests and Lindsay responded to me. And it's like, of course, duh, this makes so much sense. I hear about this from clients, and I just never really considered addressing it on the show. So here we go. The show today is about snoring and how disruptive that can be for your relationship and your sex life, and what to do about it. And what's interesting, my guest, Lindsay Tucker, has a really strong feeling that what we do about it is not solve the snoring, because it's basically unsolvable if it isn't sleep apnea, but it's about addressing the quality of sleep of the other person, helping them be such a deep and great sleeper that the snoring is no longer disruptive. Total flip from what I would have thought. So she is really an expert in this, driven by her own personal life experiences to start with. She's got a whole business around helping people sleep, and it makes a huge difference. I hope you enjoy the show. So Lindsay, thank you so much for being with me today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this topic. I don't know that this would have ever occurred to me to cover this on an episode, and yet it is something I hear from clients.
Yeah.
There's snoring, there's separate bedrooms, like it's this huge impact.
Yeah.
So even though I've heard it repeatedly, I guess I didn't know there was an expert to talk to either.
I didn't know there needed to be an expert, but it's very common. So I'm happy to be here talking about it.
Yeah. So let's start with how do you think, sleep and sex are connected, or what's a relationship from your point of view?
Yeah, well, most people can see the link between sleep and sex because sex often takes place in a bed, which that's true, it happens, but it really goes deeper than that. And when you can sleep soundly next to your partner, it can really help build intimacy and closeness. And again, most of us sleep in bed with our partner, but not anyone else. And that can help create a really special bond. Right. But on the other hand, when your partner's disruptions, like their snoring, keeps you up all night, well, then instead of feeling this loving feeling towards them, you might feel resentment and lonely and frustrated. Yeah. And I'll say that it's especially true if the snoring happens frequently, because then there's this increased resentment and feelings that this awful thing, this snoring, is being done to you. Yeah. And then the feelings kind of seep into the sex life. So that's kind of how sleep is connected to sex, but sex is also connected to and enhances sleep, right? So especially because orgasms are like nature's little sleeping pill. So it goes both ways. Yeah.
And what I'm hearing too is it affects sex, but it also just affects your sense of intimacy and connection and goodwill, basically.
Right. Yes.
Which is pretty hard to have things going well if that's how you feel. So you mentioned disruptions, which made me think: is there more than one kind of sleep disruption? Like,
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of things that can disrupt your sleep. There's the more external sources, like the bright lights, loud cars that are passing by on the street, if your neighbor's having a party.
Right.
But then there's also the internal causes, like if you're having anxiety over a big presentation at work, or you're stressing about your finances, right? So those come from within. But because snoring is caused by your partner, there are these emotions that you connect to it, and it feels really unfair that one person has to deal with it while the other is lying there sleeping peacefully.
Yeah, and I guess so. If you're stressed about work, your mind is keeping yourself up. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Although I'd imagine that to a certain degree, if your partner's tossing and turning with anxiety, I mean, even that might also impact you.
Right, but then it feels more like your partner is also struggling with something, right?
Oh.
It's not as one-sided or one directional, I guess.
Oh, that's interesting, right? Because the person who's snoring is generally sound asleep and you're happy as a clam. They don't realize there's a problem. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so
that
I
makes
mean,
sense.
I have to tell a story that
Okay.
maybe some of your listeners can relate to, and it's kind of what sparked my whole obsession with snoring. When I started dating my now husband, we had this amazing date night out, and then he came back to my place for our first sleepover, and within minutes of him falling asleep, he was snoring so loudly that I could not stay in the room anymore.
Oh my
I
gosh.
was furious. I went out to the couch, totally upset that my night had been ruined, and I had to put on these headphones with really loud music playing, but I could still hear him snoring.
Oh my gosh.
And I started to cry. I thought, how am I ever going to sleep next to him? It felt really hopeless.
Yeah.
And the thing about snoring, and I mean, I tell this story not to make my husband feel bad, although there was a lot of that early in our relationship, but now we can kind of joke about it. But there's no way I'd be that upset if it was a party that my neighbors were throwing next door that kept me awake, right?
Yeah.
To me, his snoring was ruining my chances of having this amazing close connection. I kind of felt robbed. So to top it all off, he didn't believe me when I told him about his snoring. So I ended up recording him on my phone and playing it back just so he could hear what it was really like, which was a bit of a wake-up call.
I would imagine that's pretty common, that people maybe don't even know that they snore. Or
Right.
certainly not how frequently or how loudly or how disruptive it is.
And you never would know unless you have someone who can't sleep through it next to you.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, if your neighbor's having a party, you're thinking, well, at least it's Saturday night. This makes sense. It's not going to be every night for the rest of my life. Where with a new partner, it's sort of like, holy cow, is this what
Exactly.
is this what I'm signing up for? So what do people do? Like, what's the basic? I mean, you obviously married this guy, so it's not it's not insurmountable somehow, right?
Mm-hmm. It's not. It's something that a lot of people initially will try to fix the person who snores, right? So I sent my husband off to a doctor to make sure there was no sleep apnea and all those things.
Right.
But I mean, like clockwork, it would come back every night.
Oh.
And so really, I believe, and my approach is that the person who's affected by the snoring needs to learn how to sleep better, because you're never going to change the other person. Right now, there is no real cure for snoring. So it's more about learning to sleep so soundly that you can't even hear the snoring beside you.
Wow. Okay. So it does seem important, like, to rule out things like apnea.
Of course.
Right.
Yes.
Like, there are health concerns or there's reasons. I mean, some of this stuff can be addressed.
Yeah.
But if it isn't an underlying medical condition, you
then
just
it's
accept that they're just going to snore.
Right.
So it's not just get them to sleep on their side or get some strips that they put on their nose or something.
And, and most people who have a snoring partner have gone through all of those things. There's throwing the tennis ball into the back of the pajamas so they can't lie on their back, special pillows for their neck, the nose strips, the mouth guards. It's endless, but it doesn't work.
Okay. So use voice of experience here, I can tell,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay. So the answer is, wow, for you to sleep soundly enough that you don't hear that.
Right.
Okay. How do you do that? Like, I mean, there's probably more than one way, but like, what? Just seems like I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. That seems...
Well, my approach is to work with people to strip away the things that are causing the disruptions, right? You don't take your partner away. That's, they're there with you, but take away some of the things that you might not even think of that are robbing you of your sleep before you even get in bed, right? We know a lot of exposure to blue light can impact our circadian rhythm and how likely it is that we're going to fall asleep. If you address some of those things up front, then you're in a better position to sleep. So that's getting rid of things, but then you need to add some things back in. And it might be you need to make sure that your room is cool enough that you can fall asleep comfortably and stay asleep. You might need blackout curtains because you don't want the street light to get in your eye or wake up first thing in the morning because the sun's coming up. So it is a combination of those things.
Okay. Earplugs?
Yeah. I mean,
noise canceling headphones. I mean, I can't imagine really sleeping in those, but are those helpful too?
So I'll tell you what my arsenal used to look like.
Okay.
I would sleep with one earplug in and then a sound machine on my phone under my pillow. So my ear that was up had the earplug. The ear that was down had my sound machine, which also had my alarm because I needed to get up at a certain time in the morning.
Yeah.
I had a sound machine, blackout curtains. I'd have aromatherapy going. And, sometimes none of that even made a difference. And that was before I really learned how to sleep. So I would try all these gimmicky type things and none of it worked. So I had to dig a little bit deeper. And so I did tons of research and, the old world solutions, the new techniques, and just trial and error to see what worked. And I kind of found something that worked for me.
Yeah. What about the non-snoring partner going to sleep first? Is that helpful?
Yep. That can be a tool. But I mean, anytime you're trying to get people to get to sleep at different times, there can be sort of conflicting feelings about that.
Right.
But yeah, that is an option, especially if they get just a bit of a head start. It might be enough to get them into the sleep cycle deep enough that they don't hear the snoring. But I mean, sometimes our bodies are so conditioned because we wake up over and over again that we really have to teach ourselves to sleep soundly. It's the same way you would teach a child to sleep, to go with a bedtime routine and everything.
Yeah. So even if you went to bed earlier in the beginning of the night, if you get up, whatever, when you have to go back to sleep, you're going to still have to overcome that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what about sleeping in separate bedrooms? Because this is something I definitely hear from couples, and some of them have more struggle with this than others, but certainly it's a common strategy.
It is, and it's something I have mixed feelings about.
Okay.
I see it as a Band-Aid solution, and it has to be navigated really carefully so feelings don't get hurt. I'll tell you another story about my snoring experience. So when my husband and I moved into a new house about a year after we started living together, for me, one of the best things about the house was that there was a spare bedroom. And so I was thrilled. I thought, my problems are solved. I'll just hop out of bed when the snoring starts and I can sleep peacefully in the other room. But instead, what happened was, and I hear a lot of similar stories, so maybe your listeners have experience with this as well. I'd walk back into the bedroom the next day and it felt like a walk of shame. I mean, my husband would feel awful about his snoring, and it started to weigh on him because we felt more like roommates than a couple. And so for that reason, it wasn't really a viable option. It was really important for us that we slept in the same bed, and I agree but I was at a loss. Like I just was not sleeping, right? So right. I was barely sleeping. Our sex life felt really mechanical because I was fighting all this resentment that I had towards him. Mm-hmm. And now he felt hurt that we weren't even sharing the same room anymore. So yeah, I knew that just couldn't be a long-term solution. But what I will say about separate rooms is that it can be a tool to jumpstart the process of learning to sleep next to a snorer. But the goal is always to get you back in bed with your partner. For example, the program that I teach, and I used to teach sleeping because we have to learn how to sleep, is to suggest maybe 1 or 2 nights where the sleeper gets to sleep in their own room so that they can start that process of learning to sleep better. But it's always in the context of a more comprehensive plan to get the person sleeping next to their partner. Right. It's not a solution in and of itself, in my opinion. Yeah. Some people may be okay with it, and if it works for them, it works for them. But on par, we just have so many stigmas attached to sleeping in separate bedrooms that often couples won't be willing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's really a mix, because I agree with your main point that if we sleep apart, or if we go to bed at really different times and up at really different times, so we're not connecting in the bedroom, it certainly makes an impact on the opportunities for sex, that sense of connection. Like, I totally agree with you on that. And then I know there are certain situations where people are in separate bedrooms, whether it's restless leg syndrome or snoring or whatever it is. And, and then I think they just have to work hard to find those opportunities for intimacy and close. Like, it's got to be, somehow they've got to compensate, or there's going to be a real loss.
Right. It's the same. Yes. Shift workers have to deal with it all the time.
Right. Right. And what about, you said you would leave and go to the separate bedroom, but I'm imagining, how many times people sort of kick their partner out as if the sleeper is breaking some law or something,
Yeah, that's, again, it's something you have to navigate carefully, because it's like telling the other person that they don't have as much a right to be in the big bed as you do, and they're doing something wrong, when really, if they could help it, they likely wouldn't snore. Nobody is choosing to snore. So it's not fair on either part, for the snorer to get kicked out, or for the person who's affected by it to have to get up every night and drag their blankie down the hall to the spare bedroom. It's just not a viable solution.
Hey, it's Jessa. I'm just taking a little break to invite you to my free monthly webinars that I do on a variety of topics that always include an open Q&A session with me at the end. I'm doing these monthly. If you want to hear about them, be invited so you can register. Make sure you join my mailing list. You can go to bettersexpodcast.com/list. Is the snore, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but are there any health costs or sleep quality costs for the person that's snoring? Like, I know they're snoring because they're asleep, but is it, maybe I'm just thinking too much about apnea, but is there any sort of concern that somebody would have if they're snoring? You know what? The main issue comes when there is sleep apnea, because the oxygen isn't getting through to the person on a consistent basis. So they're waking up multiple times throughout the night because they can't get enough oxygen. So clearly that's preventing them from getting a sound sleep, which is an issue in and of itself, but not having that oxygen readily available is kind of a big deal. But other than that, there's not really any major impacts to the snorer because of their own snoring. Okay. So if you would talk a little bit about just the importance of sleep, what it does for us. I think people get, I don't know, like, everybody's chronically sleep deprived, right? They're too busy, they're working hard, they're anxious, all this stuff. And I'm thinking, anyway, speak to the importance of sleep, because obviously it's something you're passionate about. Sleep is the one thing we change during every stage of our lives, but the one constant is that we always need sleep. From the time we're babies to the time we're in our golden years, we need sleep. It promotes mental alertness. It impacts our decision making. You can't think clearly if you're chronically sleep deprived. Mm-hmm. If you're a growing teenager, you need the right amount of sleep so that you can grow and develop properly. I used to be into fitness quite a bit, and the amount of sleep you need for your body to recover and just regenerate cells and repair muscle tissue and things like that, it's essential. It is a non-negotiable. And we have this culture that tells us, if we're really busy and if we're actually successful and we're actually making a difference in the world, then how can you possibly have time to sleep? And it's come to be that sleep equals laziness. And that's something I'm trying to change, because you can be so much more productive and such a more contributing person if you're well rested and you have the energy to do everything. If you can't keep up with your kids, what's the quality of your family time going to be? If you're ready to crash the second you walk in the door after work,
really, what's your life looking like? It's just not a great place to be.
Yeah.
So it's fundamental for a healthy life, and that includes a healthy sex life.
Right.
Right.
What are the top signs that somebody isn't getting enough sleep? I mean, certainly if you're exhausted right when you come home from work, I heard that one, right? But are there other things to sort of look for or to know, because I know people, or I have known people that said 4 hours is all they need. They do perfectly on 4 hours. Other people say 6. It's like, how does one determine that you're actually getting enough?
Well, those people have probably just learned to be sleep deprived, and they've become accustomed to being sleep deprived. If you gave them 7 or 8 hours sleep a night, I'm sure their bodies would take it, because that's really what we need. But people who are sleep deprived have trouble losing weight. They have trouble with their cognitive functioning, making decisions and thinking clearly. Obviously, if they're falling asleep in places when they shouldn't, if you see people who are nodding off in the boardroom at a meeting, people are sleep deprived. They're not getting the sleep that they need. The other sign is if you fall asleep within minutes of lying down, technically it's likely that you're sleep deprived, although my husband can close his eyes and fall asleep. So he's a bit of an anomaly in that sense.
I used to be like that. I thought plenty of sleep, but I could also go to sleep really easily. It's certainly gotten more difficult as I get older. But, yeah.
And I mean, we tend to put our sleep on the back burner, and it's the thing that gets pushed out every single day.
Right.
We try to get everything done during the day, and the thing that suffers is your sleep. So if a meeting runs late and then you have to pick the kids up from soccer and then make dinner and do all these things, plus hop on your emails a little bit before bed, by the time you know it, you're an hour or two into your scheduled sleep time, and that time is gone. And the thing I also take issue with is we make compromises with ourselves. So if I don't get a good night's sleep, maybe I'll skip the gym in the morning. And then what does that do to my physical health? Not to mention, my mental health and things like that. But also we cut out what we deem to be non-essentials, and that includes sex. And it's a very easy thing to cut out because it seems like it's optional. And especially if a snorer is keeping you up, then it's kind of their fault that you're so tired. So leave me alone type thing.
Yeah. Well, and if people, I mean, I hear this all the time too, if people are going to bed and if they're just crashing, I mean, they're barely making it into the bedroom, they're not having much sex, right? There are people, certainly tons of people that have told me I would rather sleep, which just indicates they're not getting enough.
Right.
Yeah. What's your position on napping?
I love napping. I really do. I think there's 2 different schools. So one school of thought says nap for 25 minutes, no more, no less, because then otherwise you start getting into your actual sleep cycle, which can leave you feeling groggy. I'm of the opinion that if you need to sleep for a couple hours because you didn't get it the night before, then go for it. It's very unique and individual to the person, so you have to test it out, but it can be a really effective way to give you that boost of energy that you need to carry you through the day. And in my mind, it's better to nap and get that bit of energy than it is to take on the extra sleep debt, because unless you're planning to go to bed early that night and just tack it on to the rest of your sleep, you're just missing out on it altogether.
Does it count as much as nighttime sleep?
It does. It can. Okay. Some of it is more superficial, especially if you're having a 25-minute nap. That's a cat nap. Yeah. If you're going 90 minutes, 2 hours, that gets you through a full sleep cycle. So depending on how much your body needs, it can be like you're going to sleep for a short period.
Yeah. And I recognize that people on shift work or certain schedules don't really have a lot of choice, but it doesn't matter what time we're sleeping. I guess I've had this idea, and I don't know if it's true or not, that like sleep before midnight is more important than sleep after midnight. Like, sleeping from 1 a.m. till 9 a.m. is somehow not as healthy as sleeping from 10 at night to 6 a.m. or something. But maybe that's just totally erroneous.
Well, in a sense, if you think about our circadian rhythm and how back in the day we would rise with the sun and go to sleep when the sun went down, then you're right. If you're not getting in a bit of sleep earlier in the night, then you're probably dragging it into the next day, and you're going to sleep through the first few hours of daylight, and that can really disrupt your body's clock, and it kind of throws off some of the main functions that your body has. So as much as possible, it's important to keep a similar wake up time. Wake up time is more important than bedtime. It trains our bodies to do things at a certain time. It includes digestion and all that kind of stuff. So when you wake up around the same time, it's a signal to your body. Now, you can go to sleep whenever you can go to sleep, but it just doesn't have the same effect as if you have varying wake up times.
Okay. So the recommendation is to get up at the same time, basically every day, not sleep in on the weekends.
Right. Within an hour, which is so hard for everybody because, most of us are trying to catch up on sleep on weekends. That's why we're waiting for Friday so that you get a good sleep at night. But then you really pay for it on Monday morning when you have to shock your body by getting up that much earlier and starting the cycle all over again.
Right. All right. So what, I want you to, if you would, just talk a little bit about your program or how people, what's the process by which people learn to sleep and in what kind of time frame does it take? Especially, if they're partnered with a snorer specifically too. Like what are they looking at?
Right. So I found about 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks is enough to significantly change sleep habits. It takes a very willing person. They have to want to change. And usually if they're that sleep deprived, yes, they will want to change, right?
Yeah.
So like I mentioned before, it's stripping away the sleep disruptors and then being very intentional about adding the sleep promoters back in so that people end up sleeping like babies. And as I mentioned before, the goal is not to rely on curing your partner of their snoring, but just make it so that you sleep so soundly that you don't even notice the snorer who's lying beside you, right? And I mean, a lot of it is mindset related. I mentioned, the resentment that I felt towards my husband when he snores. That needs to change. I'll tell you that much, because if you go into this constantly feeling that resentment and that negativity, it's going to be very difficult to change. It's going to be very difficult to learn to sleep soundly, because part of sleeping soundly is, letting go of things so that you can drift off to sleep. And if you're holding on to that, those negative feelings, they linger into your sleep. So it's certainly.
Well, just like any anxiety, right? If you're going to ruminate about how much you hate that they're snoring and you're mad, all of a sudden your mind's totally engaged, right?
That's right.
Sleep, right.
Yeah.
So do you still offer a program or a class?
I do. Yes.
Okay. Would you say a little bit about where people could find you?
Sure. They can find me over at artfulsleep.com, and it's my 4-week sleep detox that they can sign up for. I also have a freebie that they can get when they join my sleep club. And the first rule of sleep club is that we talk about sleep club, because I want people to start talking about sleep and how necessary it is. So they can come on over to artfulsleep.com, and that's the best place to get me, and they can connect with me via email as well.
Great. I'll put that link in the show notes too, so people have easy access.
Thank you.
So great. Well, thank you so much for being on today.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.